you everybody for coming to our second virtual meetup. Our plan now is to kind of continue to have this every month. And so I know our last one was 2 months ago, but our goal is to get at least this virtual meetup set up, since it's fairly simple to prepare once a month going forward. And if we can do more than that, we're happy to do it if there's demand for it. And so today we have just like have a brief agenda, some brief announcements that we're going to make. Vil is going to talk a little bit about the 0.37 release real quick. There was some voting that's out today, and so he'll kind of highlight some of the things around that. And then obviously the big presentation and demo that we have today will be around, so you want to build a Superset Viz plugin, and that'll be presented by Evan and Vile from Preset. Then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. This is going to be open Q&A, anything around the presentation, about the release, about anything in general for Superset. We'll make that open for everybody, and so you can ask the questions on the Q&A section here on the Zoom. And then at the end, we always have open mic for our meetup. So if anyone has any other general announcements, if you guys are hiring or whatnot, you guys can make a shout out and just kind of raise your hand, and I can unmute. I can unmute you, and you guys can kind of chime in. So that's the general agenda for today. So quick announcements. We have 3 new committers as part of the Superset project. And so we want to welcome Will Barrett, Jesse Yang, and Serena Jiang to the Superset committer group. And so welcome, you guys. We're excited to continue to grow this committer group. It just kind of shows the momentum behind it, behind the project. And so very excited to have these 3 join the community. We've also made, if you guys are on the Slack channel, on the Superset Slack, we made some big updates in the last couple weeks. And a part of it, and the motivation behind the Slack updates is really to foster better discussion and encourage more engagement on the community side. Also, we wanted to kind of reduce some of the noise that goes into like the general channel and kind of put it into more purposeful channels, so people can kind of navigate, how to answer questions. So people who have the ability to answer those questions, they know kind of where to go. And if for people with specific questions, there's kind of dedicated channels for you there too. So we encourage you to introduce yourself on the Slack community, so other people and new people who join can know who you are, update your profile. And also, if you have specific questions, make sure to ask them in the right channels. And so that's kind of the big Slack update. And hopefully this will make the Slack community more engaged and a little bit easier to navigate. We've also been sending out our monthly newsletter. So if you have not registered or have not received a newsletter, make sure to sign up. You can sign up at preset.io. We kind of are the ones sending out the newsletters. We'll also post these onto the Superset GitHub page when they are posted. And so you can actually go back and look at it. And so a lot of new cool things in the new newsletter, especially around specific content and blog posts. And the big one obviously was on the topic today, which is how to build a Viz plugin for Superset. And then the big one is second release candidate for 0.37 went out for voting today as of this morning. And so you can actually go look at that. And I'll kind of hand it off to Vile right now, so he can kind of give a quick update on what's going on with 0.37.
One more thing I wanted to say related to the Slack update is we're committing to using Stack Overflow as the Q&A kind of platform for Superset, at least like running an experiment on that. So we're actively directing people that are asking questions on the Slack to ask and answer those questions on Stack Overflow, where there's like, it's a much better place to do that. There's deduping a question, we can build a knowledge base. People get rewarded for asking and answering questions. So, so please not only start using Stack Overflow for questions and answers, but direct other people there when you can on our Slack.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Max. One of the benefits of that is when people are searching also like for questions on via Google, it can point them to Stack Overflow. If it's like kind of stuck on Slack, Slack, you can't actually search through it publicly. So we want to make all this knowledge available for everybody, new users and old users alike. So I'll hand it off to Villa to kind of just make a quick update and announcement.
Yeah, thanks. So so like Alan mentioned earlier on, the second release candidate for 0.37 went out for a vote today. And the 0.37 release is kind of a very overdue release that we've been working on for a long time. And it's going to introduce a lot of new features and bug fixes. Amongst others, it's actually the first release to properly introduce support for Viz plugins. So very relevant for today's talk. And I think we're going to be covering the release more in detail in a separate blog post and probably in a later meetup. So more to come on that front.
Quick extra note on that too. So the quality of the release is dependent on a lot of people going and testing that release and finding issues with them. We're super happy to fix the bugs and roll them out and produce more release candidates. But the more people test it all at the same time, the more we can guarantee a quality release. So please help if you have a way to just kind of bring that release locally, stage it, test it, whether it's manually or in an automated way. Help is very welcome. We're also looking to have a much more commit to a release cadence that's going to be a lot more steady. We haven't decided exactly the terms, but it's going to be probably every 4 weeks or 6 weeks. You should see a new Superset release out. I think it's really important to have that cadence, and it makes it easier to release if we do it more frequently too. So we're looking to do that in the future. So next release might be, it's probably less than 6 weeks away from now after 0.37 is released.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Awesome, thanks for that. Now I'm gonna pass it over to Evan, and so I'll stop sharing here. And so Evan, you can kick us off on how to build a Viz plugin.
All right, hopefully everyone can see the screen here. So let's see. So this blog post went out recently that I'm hoping people have had a chance to take a look at. If not, there's the URL at the bottom there, so grab a screenshot. But that post contains the full instructions of what we're going to go through today. I'm going to gloss over some of those details, like installing Superset and so forth. But we're going to go a little deeper as well on some of the aspects of what this project actually builds. So this might get a little technical going into what we're covering today. So this is kind of geared toward Viz developers. Thankfully, this is remote, so if it's not your cup of tea, you're not stuck in a chair staring at a big projection screen. Just a little background on what exactly a Viz component is. It's simply a chart, but it also contains a set of controls, which you see here on the left side of the Explore view in Superset, and that really kind of drives your query and drives the display properties of your Viz. It also is just basically a wrapper element, a div that you can kind of do anything with, so to speak. And we'll get into some of those capabilities. And then of course, there's the data that you pass into your visualization to render. Now, building these in the past has been difficult. A lot of amazing work was done early on, but it was always kind of a difficult thing because you had to write some code in Superset and some in a different repo called Superset UI. And the code kind of had to be released in 2 pull requests, and that was difficult to manage both from a review standpoint and a contribution standpoint. Writing controls was difficult because it was one huge file. You had to write a bunch of stuff in Python to get the query working in many cases. Linking this stuff up to test locally was difficult, and yeah, the API was not ideal, so we had to work on that. Other motivational factors were that the existing documentation like blog posts and draft PRs and READMEs and so forth were a little bit out of date. There's a number of aging plugins built into Superset that we're kind of hoping to basically replace. And the ecosystem was kind of closed to new plugins because the architecture just kind of wasn't ready for prime time. So we wanted to improve upon that. And this is something that I've been excited to build a plugin for a long time, and it always proved difficult. So we wanted to make the whole process easier. And to pave the way to do all of this, there were a bunch of SIPs, or for those who are not familiar, these are superset improvement proposals. The key one here is SIP 38, and that kind of goes into kind of the pain points and the proposed resolutions of how we can make this whole process easier. Some related ones include the redesign of Superset we talked about in a previous meetup, and that kind of pertains to why we're building plugins the way we are now, so we can theme them and so forth according to the new design. And to do that, we're using a CSS and JS library called Emotion. There's lots of details about that on that SIP. And then, of course, things in Superset are now standardizing around TypeScript. A lot of motions being made in that direction. So all of this adds up to a bunch of new features. We've got a new chart data endpoint we're going to go into some pretty good detail today about. We've got all the controls, and basically all of the code of a plugin now lives within the plugin in Superset UI currently. So it's all been kind of consolidated. There is still a little bit of change you have to make in Incubator Superset if you want to actually load the plugin there, and we'll see that in action here. And then, of course, the styling I just mentioned using the theme. But we also have some more work to do here. This is going to get even easier, and I'll show you the details of that at the end. So to prove out all these new toys, some of us built this word chart plugin, and it basically was the first kind of proof of concept to use all of the new toys. And you can check out the code on Superset UI if you like. It's public. If you just want to see a working example of a plugin, that's a good one to dissect. And so now we want to be able to make it so that anyone can do this, of course. That's why we're here. So we wanted to make a Hello World plugin that was basically, kind of a set of best practices. We wanted to make it easier for people to kind of follow a pattern that's very flexible and kind of unopinionated, using all of these latest things, and of course, well documented. So we decided to build that using a tool called Yeoman. There was already this generator, a Yeoman generator built into Superset UI, and what it was building was kind of out of date. So we went through it and kind of tore it apart and rebuilt it to build this Hello World plugin using that. And that's what our demo is going to be. So without further ado, we're just going to do this thing. And, as always, this is a live demo, so it's, we'll see how it goes. So here I am I've got a few tabs open in my terminal. One is Incubator Superset, and I'm in the Superset front-end folder. I've got Superset actually running, and if anyone is not already running Superset, I highly recommend the Docker approach. It's significantly easier than the other way.
Hey, Evan, can you make it a little bit bigger? It's a little hard to see with all the background tabs.
Bigger, yeah. Or good old Command plus.
Yeah, how's that?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so here we are in the plugins folder of Superset UI, which is where all the plugins currently live. So as you can see, they have kind of a name spacing to their directories. So we're going to go ahead and build a new one here called Hello World.
By the way, the term that you see with legacy, those are plugins that were written before we have the new architecture. So that means that for their backend, they don't use the new query endpoint that we're going to talk about today, and they use instead custom Python code.
Yep. So now that I made that directory and gone in there, oops, dang it. There we go. This is the command you run if you have the Yeoman generator installed globally. And that Yeoman generator is available, published today, so anyone can use it. And when it loads in a second here, it's going to walk us through a couple of options that we have. So you can make the plugin however you want it to be. Takes a moment, load some stuff. Here we go. So you can create a Superset core package, but that's not what we're going to do today. We want to make a plugin package. And it automatically grabs some sensible defaults based on your folder name that you're in, and Hello World is just lovely. You get your choice of what kind of React component you want. So if you want to use kind of the standard class lifecycle methods, you can do that, or you can use functions with hooks. That's, you know, the new stuff, and that's what I want to do. You've got your choice of a time series chart, or, you know, kind of a non-time series chart, and that adds some controls and query options automatically for you out of the box if you choose time series. We're going to go regular. Then this stuff is if you want to actually contribute your plugin to Superset UI, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I'll say yes. And then here we go. Those are the files that it spat out. So here they all are. And what we need to do here is we essentially have a Hello World plugin at this point. I'll poke around in the files in a minute, but right now I want to go over to Superset itself and link this thing up. So
Command plus.
Is that, oh yes, thank you. Is that sufficient?
Looks good.
Okay. All right. Let me shorten my window actually. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna have a plugin here that's called Plugin Charts Hello World. Just gonna give it a fake version number, but I'm adding it to the package JSON of Superset. And then I'm going to do something quite like this to add it to main preset, which is where all the plugins are registered.
And all of this is documented super well, like step by step in the blog post, right? So you can see very clearly all the edits that are required here, which is a handful of edits in this repo.
Yeah. Okay, and then that needs to be loaded down here. There we are. Hello world. This is the key that's persisted in the database to refer to your chart forever and ever. So over here, let me, sorry, pardon while I fumble. Here you. Ah, that's better. Okay, so now we need to do some npm link magic, and thankfully the Webpack setup of Superset has made this much easier. All you do is type the path to your local copy of Superset UI, and then you go to plugins, and there it is, and that starts kind of linking it up as a locally referenced npm dependency. This takes but a minute. All right, that seemed to work. So now we just run Superset. And this part might take a minute. So Kevin, if you have that elevator music at the ready, now would be the time.
I can a cappella it.
Actually, this might be a good moment to answer a couple of questions from the chat. There's one question, which is, can you change later the type of the chart in terms of time series or not?
You can definitely add the controls, or why is it not showing? Hold on a second.
And then while Evan figures that out, when will dynamic loading be implemented? We're working on it.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that at the end here.
Nice. And actually one more Q&A that was answered, but was not recorded. So I'm just going to recite this for the sake of the recording. The question is, what about the time section in control panel? is not optional, time series, yes or no. And Vil answered, it is used for filtering. So if someone specifies a certain time range, that's the column it will reference. All right, very, very substantive elevator music we have here in the buffer.
But yeah, if you decide you want to kind of change paths, you can always just generate a plugin that's using the other React component or the other controls, and basically kind of migrating your code over is hopefully not that huge of a deal.
I'm sure, yeah, you could look at both template being generated in isolation and see the exact difference between the two and kind of bring what's missing to your plugin.
Exactly. So this thing's loading just a couple of packages. Should be just about done. All right. So now let's see it. Here we go. Let's make a new chart in Superset. I'll use birth names. And there you go. Here's our plugin with the default thumbnail, which of course you can put your design hat on and override. And there we go. This thing is live. And what we can do now is start fiddling around with some of the query parameters. Oops, this old game. No filter on the time, please. And there we go. It just pumps out a bunch of data and it spits it all out to JSON, which is not amazing in its own right. But again, this just is proving to be a scaffold so you can build upon it. Didn't want to have a bunch of code in there you can delete, you need code, need to delete. But in your console, it shows you some of the kind of key elements that you'll be working with. Here's your actual div element, which you can write a bunch of JSX that goes into it, or you can latch onto that DOM element and go crazy with DOM type tools. There's the form data, which is what comes out of all these controls, including these customizable ones where you can change the title of your plugin or make the text not bold and change font sizes and so forth. Then last but not least, you should be able to see your data and so forth that comes through as props to that plugin. So once all that stuff is, in React, the world is your oyster, so to speak. That is the demo of building that part of the Hello World plugin, but let's take a look at the code real quick and see some of the things we've won. So if you look at the Hello World plugin itself, you'll notice that all of these files are full of documentation comments, and I'm hoping that really helps people. If you ever get stuck on anything, let us know and we'll continue to add things. But I wanted to point out some of the stuff, like there's already emotion in use to put styles into using the
Evan, I don't think you're sharing your screen.
We can't see your screen.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. Okay, here we go. So yeah, now you can see it hopefully, but these comments exist in every file that's generated by the plugin. Lots of notes. You can go through here and see that we're using emotion to style, using the Superset theme that's coming into shape. And here's the actual function component with a ref to the DOM that you can use Echarts or D3 to latch onto and do DOM stuff, or you can just spit out a bunch of stuff in JSX here to build something custom that way too. So that's essentially the template. Now, I come back over here to the slides. This is the full set of files that's generated by the plugin Yeoman generator. And let's see, we've already looked a little bit at some of them, but the key ones that you're going to do a lot of work in are really build query and transform props. Build query is what you use to obviously make the query, and transform props is what you kind of do with the data when it comes back. But I want to hand the mic over to Vila, who is going to really kind of go in depth on what some of those new features are. So I will stop sharing my screen.
All right, thanks, Evan. Just a second, I'll just share my screen here. Okay. So in addition to the Viz plugins themselves, what's actually kind of required for being able to produce these visualizations is what we call the chart data endpoint. And the chart data endpoint is essentially what's used to construct all the queries and get data back from the back end. And this, for those of you who are familiar with the Superset code base, there's something called viz.py, which is used for constructing the queries and then shuffling back the data from for the legacy charts. So the chart data, the new chart data endpoint is what we're using to be able to fully decouple the Viz plugins from the back end. So that's been kind of a big thing, being able to make the backend not have to be aware of what you're actually being charting. And what actually happens is it takes the control values or control state from the control panel that your Viz has, and then it translates those into a data query that's sent to your SQL backend. And then it does some additional data transformation on top of that before it sends the data back. And for Viz developers who want to query the chart data endpoint, you have to actually make some small modifications to the build query file. So in build query, you actually tell your Viz what kind of a request it's supposed to be sending through to the chart data endpoint. I'll just quickly show you. I think this is something most people aren't familiar with, but Superset actually ships with this Swagger schema and page where you can look at all of the Swagger schemas for all of the APIs that Superset offers. And so if you go in and look at the charts data schema, there's actually fairly extensive documentation here that you can look at when you need help in understanding what the requests are supposed to look like. So in addition to having documentation for the endpoint itself, there's actually a bunch of additional schemas here as well. So for instance, there's these post-transformation operations that I'm going to be talking about soon that are all kind of fairly well documented here. So they're fairly simple to use.
A quick comment here too is one thing is great about Superset is that it knows how to speak to different databases back end too, right? So here we use an abstraction on top that's a query object that behind the scene gets translated in whatever SQL dialect of the database that you might use. So that allows you to not go to that level of writing SQL, and then it makes it such that your plugin will work across all the databases that we support.
So then comes the question, because in the basic case, what the chart data endpoint does is it essentially just translates your request into a SQL query, and for some very kind of simple charting use cases, that tends to be enough. But what I've found is that tends to not really be enough. So even for a fairly simple line chart, you tend to need to do some pivoting and some other operations that SQL backends or analytical databases usually don't support out of the box or globally at least. So for this reason, there's this transform props file where you can essentially do any kind of data wrangling that you need to do with JavaScript syntax or libraries. But the problem here is that, first of all, that there's no caching, so it can be computationally expensive. And then there's a bunch of tools in the Python data ecosystem that are actually slightly more advanced than what's being offered in the JavaScript ecosystem right now. So in JavaScript that there isn't really anything that's as feature complete as pandas right now. And then also just kind of general network bottlenecks. So if you have to transfer a lot of raw unprocessed data and then aggregate that in the front end, that's going to cause a bunch of kind of bottlenecks that are kind of unnecessary. So for this use case, the chart data endpoint offers a bunch of kind of commonly needed data transformation operations. So there's a bunch of pivots, rolling aggregations, and other stuff that you can use. And these once when you send out the query to the database, and then you perform all of these expensive transformations or potentially expensive transformations, it's the end result that gets cached, which means that these only need to be done once, and then in subsequent calls, those are going to be picked up from the cache. So it's actually going to be slightly faster than in legacy viz.py, where it was only the SQL query that was being cached, and not the final transformed thing. So and then you can kind of chain multiple operations together. So this is what I kind of call super SQL. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get what SQL offers, but where SQL falls short, you can then use whatever kind of more advanced data operations you need. So we've tried to make this as simple as possible, and the basic idea here is that as long as you have tabular data, you should be able to kind of transform this into any kind of shape that you need. And in this case, I have a picture here where there's tabular data with one column with names, and if you have a viz where for the line chart, for instance, where you want to have one series per name, then that needs to be pivoted. So I'm not going to go into detail on these. These are here mostly for reference, but this kind of just goes to show that when you put this post-processing operation into the chart data endpoint request, it knows how to kind of transform these, and you can kind of chain a bunch of these together, and you can actually do a bunch of very kind of sophisticated stuff if you join these together in a kind of sensible way. So here's, and also this is kind of mainly for reference here, but this kind of shows what the build query file looks like for a line chart where we need to do a pivot, and then after that we need to do a contribution operation in case the user has flipped the contribution switch. So it's essentially, you start off with what's called a base query object that you just kind of initialize your object from. Then you kind of add any, kind of flip any additional switches, like in this case, it's you tell it that it's going to be a time series chart, and then you add whatever post-processing operations that you kind of chain together. And this is the kind of base functionality that we've presented here is already very stable, I think, but we're kind of looking to take this a step further. So right now we have a pull request open for Facebook Profit, and that's going to be adding the capability to actually do predictive analytics. So instead of just kind of showing what happened in your historical data, it's going to be able to extrapolate into the future using this this very, very handy forecasting tool. And then also something we're working on right now is pluggable post transforms. So instead of being kind of limited to what comes out of the box inside of Superset, the idea is to make it possible to add any kind of custom data transformation plugins, so that you can introduce your own predictive models or whatever data transformation tools that you want to use in your visualization. So and now I'll hand this over to Evan, so he'll talk about what all of this very technical jargon means in practice.
Thank you. So Basically what this means is now that you have the ability to make your query much more easily and flexibly, and you have this kind of scaffolding to build a plugin using, a couple of different React approaches, you can use a whole wide variety of different Viz frameworks. I need you to actually possibly unshare. I'll take over if you want, or you can stay there. Never mind. So you can use Echarts, D3, all of these ones in this list here. But basically, what we want to focus on a little bit here for a moment is Echarts. I'm happy to say that we've been reaching out to their community because they are an Apache incubator project, much like Superset is. And they've agreed to essentially start collaborating with us and let's see where that relationship goes. And we're hoping that's going to be a really big boon to both communities. But this tool can do all kinds of crazy stuff using WebGL or Canvas or just standard DOM SVG kind of stuff. We can go a little bit into how that works, maybe show some of the code with some examples that we've been building. So with that, we have a little bit of a POC we can show. And I will hand it back to Villa to kind of show what we've been working on that front.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so I'm gonna jump into Superset here and show off this these visualization plugins that we've built. So I'm gonna start off with some of the example sample data that Superset ships with. So I'll just unflip the filter there. And then, so we've essentially built two Echarts charts. So there's a time series chart and then there's a pie chart. And the reason this is called a time series is because it kind of started out as being a line chart, but then it turned into a line and an area chart. And then it turned into a line and area and bar chart. So it kind of felt more fitting to kind of add that description that it's essentially used for plotting time series data. So for just the base case, what this plots is very similar to what the line chart does, and I have the kind of a similar line chart with the standard line chart, and in this case, the D3 chart has automatically truncated the line, and it's added this zoom functionality at the bottom. But apart from that, it looks fairly simple. And if I add gender here, then very much similar to the legacy line, it does that. But what we can do here, the Echarts is much more extensible. So I can kind of on the fly stack these. I can make an area chart, do the markers here, have smooth lines, and then make bar charts. And also if I do contributions here, then it automatically kind of scales up. So this was actually fairly simple to throw together. So all you actually needed to do was specify all the controls that you need, and then kind of hook those up to the Echarts options, and then it kind of takes the rest from there. And this also offers the same data zoom that D3 does. So so you have kind of that offered to you out the box.
I don't think we haven't covered very much the controls aspect, but I think it's good to mention that all the controls that you see throughout Superset in the Explore view are based of different kind of family of controls, like a checkbox, drop down, color picker, geospatial things. So all these controls are viable for you to use in your plugins. And I think it's possible for you to create your own controls and contribute them back for everyone to use too.
Yeah, and those are actually, I think we've documented those in the blog post, or at least in the comment section of the code. So there's some examples there, and once this is made available, it should be fairly easy to kind of pick this code and put it into your own visualizations.
Yeah, and I can take a second to show some of the code of these particular visualizations just to illustrate it.
Yeah, but so I'll just kind of wrap up here. So this is kind of a fairly simple pie chart, and I think this should be fairly easy to get to feature parity with the D3 pie chart or NVD3 pie chart. So we should be able to kind of start switching out the legacy charts with these new Echarts. Evan, do you want to share your screen?
Sure.
And I want to make a comment about Echart. So currently, a lot of the core visualizations in Superset were built using a library called NVD3 that is not well supported by it's not well maintained anymore. So so we're very much looking to move away from NVD3 that we had to fork and start to maintain and release on our own, and move to something a little bit more modern and more actively developed. Having a consistent library for the core, for a set of plugins or for the core visualization allows us to have visual consistency across the different visualization. And then Echart, and the way that it's implemented and developed too, it makes it easy to combine charts too. So it'd be possible in the future to have like these meta charts that are combining multiple charts. So I think it's really promising. And if you haven't checked out their webpage, the Echarts documentation site, check it out. It's super fun to play with. It's beautiful. It renders on either, I think you can choose Canvas or SVG, right? So we can do much more performant rendering. So that could improve the rendering time of dashboarding, even like the browser performance of heavy dashboards. So it's really, really promising. We're really excited about bringing Echarts in Superset.
Yeah, it's kind of insanely flexible. If you look at their gallery, it's actually quite inspiring, all the things you can do with it. That said, we'll show how it's used here in situ. And this is kind of the boilerplate that you get from the hello world is this function component. And all we're doing here is using this use effect hook and React to actually grab the DOM element, which is down here. That's the extent of the JSX, is this kind of styled component. And then we just initialize the Echart on that DOM element and pass it this options object, which is coming from the transform props function in our case. So this options object contains all kinds of stuff to kind of configure the plugin, and maybe this line chart one's a better example. It's got more stuff, but you can set up kind of the dimensions of it, all your axes, and what you want to do with your, this is where you kind of plug the data in, and you've got all your various on-screen tools like the zooming thing that we added, and all of that. And you just pass that object into Echarts and boom, it works. So it's really fun to start playing with it once it's that kind of declarative. Let's see. So aside from Echarts, though, you really could kind of build anything with this. Sky's the limit. You could go into your plugin and just start adding a bunch of JSX stuff here. Like you could use D3 to kind of draw a bunch of divs as rectangles and set the heights according to scales and build a bar chart that way, or whatever you want. And we have seen a number of people in the community already starting to kind of build some things based on this Hello World example. So it's really exciting to see where people take it. And actually on that note, one of the questions that's inevitably going to come up is, you know, what do I do with this plugin? How do I publish it? So historically, the answer has been you don't. That Superset UI has been kind of closed to new plugins for a good while now. But now that all this is possible, it's not wide open, but we'll take a look. There's kind of a high bar that you'll have to meet to get a new Viz plugin into Superset UI officially, because you've got to do all these things on this list here. But I think one of the important ones to mention is commitment to maintaining that plugin if you were to do it. But you know, everybody in the community is willing to look at PRs on a case-by-case basis if you think you have like a really appealing, broadly applicable plugin that you want to contribute. And on that note, we're going to make things easier. So I promised talking about some of those next steps. And some of the things we want to improve on are, of course, the documentation, taking that blog post and making it more of the official Superset docs, adding more yeoman options to add some of these other Viz libraries and so forth as boilerplates. So if you want to build an Echart, it's just easy peasy. And then the big one that I think is really going to change things a lot is this dynamic import thing that's being worked on presently, where instead of having to do that step where you do the npm linking and go and change the code in Superset to add your plugin to main preset and the package.json and all of that stuff, there will be an API where essentially you plug in the URL of a plugin bundle that's built by Webpack and hosted somewhere out on a CDN or GitHub or whatever the case may be. So you simply add the URL of that bundle, give it a key to save the chart as, and then it just loads in Superset automatically. And that, I think, is where people can really start to build these plugins on their own repos and you know, be able to kind of build them in whatever tools they want. Like if you don't want to use TypeScript, fine. If you want to use Webpack or Rollup or whatever to build them, fine. Just host it somewhere, and as long as it meets kind of the basic patterns for controls and so forth, then it'll work. So with that, I wanted to give credit where credit is due. These little shout outs to a bunch of people that have worked very hard on making all of this stuff possible. A couple of folks at Airbnb, Chris and Jesse. Chris really kind of paved the way for a lot of this stuff and built some of the original generator stuff, and he's kind of the plugin subject matter expert. Jesse is a kind of a TypeScript master. He did a lot of the Webpack work to make the linking possible, and a million PRs and features and fixes. Villa, you know, worked on the API and the post transforms and all of this great stuff. Aaron has been working on the word cloud and is working on dynamic imports right now and is helping out a lot with TypeScript stuff as well. And then Philip has been helping a lot with the migration work of trying to get, you know, a lot of these controls out of Superset and really kind of bringing forward the styling of the existing plugins and all sorts of good stuff like that. And also, of course, I should thank Max for letting us do all this stuff, building the whole thing in the first place. So with that, I think that's the show. So any questions about all of this, folks?
So why don't I read off some of the Q&As that has been accumulating while we're talking about this. So I'm just going to go down the list one by one, and whoever feels like answering them, please just jump in and do so. So the first question.
Sorry, but before the question, one thing I wanted to make a comment on, sky is the limit. And I think I think it's kind of interesting to think about what this can be too. So there's first, there's the idea of bringing like all sorts of great data visualizations here. There's an idea too of like building simple little data products or data applications in here, and then the Superset becomes almost like a little, more of a platform where you can build little data applications kind of easily too. So all the fetching of the data is done, and what's going on in that window can be arbitrarily complex. It's kind of whatever you can do with JavaScript and the DOM. And one thing that's interesting too is the idea that you can bring these little data applications and compose them into a dashboard, right, and make them more interactive with the interaction controls that the dashboards have. So really interested in seeing what comes out of that of the community too. And this like plugin ecosystem. We should definitely have a place for people to share their plugins to and showcase them, maybe on our Slack, maybe on a blog somewhere. So really curious about what people are building, and please share when you do build plugins.
Yeah, and actually speaking of that, in our community Slack channel, there is a channel called Dashboards. So this could be a place where if you start building these plugins, you can just, drop whatever you made over there and we can chat about it. Will be a good place for, showing what you built. And we actually would encourage you to even present it, in a future meetup or something, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Let's get to the Q&A. I know we have a few more minutes left. We can maybe stick around for a little bit longer, but I want to be respectful of people's time. The question right now is, so the first question, what about common reusable control panel elements across multiple plugins, like common styling options or default click actions, drill down effect? How can this be coordinated across plugins?
Yeah, so there is actually a bit of a standard set. They've effectively moved from Superset to Superset UI as part of the chart controls package, I believe it's called. So some of these ones that are used for queries and so forth by pretty much every plugin, you just kind of have to refer to them by name in your control panel configuration. But if you want to build anything custom, it's basically a little JavaScript object with a name and a bunch of parameters, which I didn't really show. Maybe that's worth just a quick flyby. Share my screen. So you can build a control like this. Like this is from the pie chart, and you basically choose what type of control you want it to be. You give it a name. This render trigger thing means it just immediately applies to the chart. You set some basic values, and then you kind of give it a key that comes through as a prop in your component. But if you wanted to do something very standard, like these group by and metrics ones are used in pretty much every chart, those are already shared. Or if you want to build something like a Echarts plugin that has a bunch of sub plugins within it as separate exports, you can make kind of a shared control panels file that acts to export all those individual controls for reuse by the individual packages. Hope that answers that.
Cool. So the next question is there an easy way to retrieve the current user data in your plugin, like username, user ID, things like that?
That's a
I
question.
think, yeah, I can think of a few kind of hacky ways to do it. So you could use Jinja templates for that, but I'd have to think about that for a while. I don't have a very good answer right kind of straight right now.
Cool.
I have managed to connect a plugin to the Redux store before, so in theory, anything that can kind of dispatch that information should be able to pass it down in theory.
Yeah, perhaps something we can discuss in the channels as well a little bit later. So the next one is, do the legacy plugins still work? I'm assuming after you build a new plugin.
Yes, they do. It's just kind of a pattern of development we're moving away from, and hopefully in time we can kind of migrate those all to the new architecture design patterns.
Yeah, that's actually something that if any community members are interested in migrating those over from the legacy viz.py to the new chart bit endpoint, that'd be really kind of a great contribution and something I think everyone would really appreciate.
Yeah, in fact, I have a personal action item to kind of make a bunch of GitHub issues. Some of them might be starter tasks for people that want to start building these things, and I'll put them all in kind of a GitHub project, kind of by theme, so people can easily find them and track them.
Yeah, and actually I could just add to that in the beginning when we were kind of starting this project, one of the thoughts that I had was that at some point we're going to have to migrate everything off of the legacy platform, but I think these can actually coexist just fine, and I think we can kind of leave them hanging for as long as they're there, and then with time I think they're going to kind of deprecate themselves.
Cool. Next question is, can you show an example of using multiple queries in the build query object?
I could. I've done a few. There's actually a few use cases where you might need one. So for instance, if you have a table with hundreds of billions of rows, but you just want to display the first 1,000 or 10,000 rows from that table, but then you want to be able to show what the total for that row would be. So kind of taking into consideration all of the data in all of the columns. Then the first query would be querying for 10,000 rows of data, and then the second query object would be just grouping by kind of aggregating over every single column. So, and that's actually fairly simple to do.
Sweet. Next one, can multiple time dimensions be filtered at the same time, like a range of shopping dates with a range of delivery dates, these sorts of things?
I could probably answer this one. I think, you know, so we have the main time filter that's at the on top left on the Explorer view, but it's also possible to filter any time column in the more generic filter window where you can filter on arbitrary dimensions. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that.
Cool. And the next one is, will DeckGL or Kepler GL be supported going forward?
You want to take that next? I mean, officially they still work. They're effectively legacy plugins, but I don't see any reason they would go away. As far as officially adding things, you know, it's kind of.
I think they should be fairly simple to migrate.
Yeah, so Deck is definitely still there. It's part of the core libraries that we push forward as we evolve, you know, the API, the framework. Kepler was more experimental, but I think it should be easy and actually better to re-implement Kepler now using the new API and the new non-legacy approach. And that should be a lot better supported. I know a little point of complexity is that DeckGL and Kepler GL need to be on the same version of DeckGL for it to work well. So you'd have to have restrictions on lining up your plugin versions so that they're pointing in the same place, or it just won't work. But all of this is very, very possible now and actually easy now.
Mm-hmm. Great. The next one is, what is the date for 3.7 release? It's pretty much like in the process, right?
Yeah, is it Python 3.7 or?
Oh, sorry, the 0.37 for Superset, my bad.
Yeah, so the release candidate just went out today for voting, so that's going to be 72 hours. And then if it passes and we don't have to make another release candidate, then that's going to be a minimum of 72 hours in IPMC voting. So minimum 6 days from now, but I expect by the end of next week.
Great. Last question for now. Is there any plan to couple the huge set of permissions for the roles?
Yes, so that is, I can take this one. So in the past, we looked at simplifying the security model in Superset by kind of merging the rules that are a little bit too atomic. There's been some work done in that area, but I think nothing has been merged. I feel like work will be done there. There's not necessarily a timeline, but there is clearly, maybe it requires a SIP too, right? But there's a reference PR, and I think we should absolutely do it. It's just a matter of like when the right time and when it becomes a top priority.
Awesome. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A tab right now. I want to close out. I mean, you guys should have another closing thought after this, but I just want to make a quick announcement that if you have any feedback about this meetup, really anything community related, you know, talks you want to hear in the future, topics, or even if you want to give your own talk about Superset, please drop a note in the community feedback channel in the Slack channel. I just put the link in the chat window. For those of you who have not seen that channel, please join there. Please, you know, share your thoughts. Love to hear everything that you folks have in terms of feedback and how we can do all this better. So with that, anything else, you know, you guys want to share before we close out today?
Yeah, just there was a mention in the chat of the visualization plugins channel on Slack. I know a few people have already started working on plugins, and which is very exciting, but that's a great place to share them. We'd love to see what you're doing with all of this.
Cool. And also a question just popped up. Is SQL Lab refers metadata? If yes, why?
Is SQL Lab what?
It refers metadata. This is what was typed in. I'm assuming referring to metadata or has reference to metadata. I don't know if the person Santosh, if you could clarify your question a little bit in the chat or something.
Let's move it to Slack. We're over the hour.
Yeah.
Probably call it. One quick note too. So visualization plugins, as you know, are like brand new. So it's still, there's an opportunity to help kind of shape it too. And, you know, we're early, but it also means that the API may settle too. So bear with us as you work on this. It should be fairly settled and supported, but things may change, you know, and that's a good thing. You can influence and make it change in the best way possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for participating. Thanks again to Evan and Ville for presenting on today's topic. We'll have this recording available for everybody, and we'll send it out via email. And I look forward to our next meetup. Hopefully we'll do something next month, and that our plan is to do one every month, and we'll probably cover 0.37 at the next meetup. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you.